I should just say, apparently we're moving away from saying safe system pillars to safe system, because it has to all join up and it's not all individual elements sort of thing. So someone's told me that and I've got to remember it and start telling other people just so that, you know, it's not things that we're doing in isolation, they all link together. Okay, so next up, I'd like to introduce Gary Jackson. He's Aviva's Head of Major and Complicated Claims for Motor and Casualty.
So, good morning, everyone. First of all, this will be brief. There are lots of subject matter experts in the audience who know much more about this than I do, so I'll be handing over to you to give your words of wisdom. But on behalf of Aviva, I'd like to welcome you all to our fantastic Hoxton office and our lovely little auditorium here. Thank you all for attending today's conference, both in person and online. Hopefully you know a bit about Aviva. We're a leading motor insurer in the UK, and we have our a wholly owned repair network, which I think is quite important and why we've got skin in the game on this. We've been an active member of PACTS for a number of years now, and so we're very interested in all things related to road safety. I head up the major and complex claims team that deal with high-value motor and casualty injury claims. This means that, unfortunately, I get to see some of the tragic consequences of accidents that happen on our roads every day. Where a poor driving decision can lead to tragic accidents and life-changing injuries or fatalities, this is not just about numbers. This is about the individual impact upon those who are injured or have suffered a fatal injury and their families. And some of those tales are absolutely gut-wrenching. They are tragic in the extreme. And it's great to have an audience here of people who I know share that passion for road safety in all its forms. I think that insurers have an important role to play within the topic of this conference. So technology and how can it reduce risk on our roads. From an Aviva perspective, this has involved some close work with Thatcham in improving safety features in vehicle tech. You'll hear a little bit later from my Aviva colleague Katie, but you won't be surprised to hear that the insurance industry as a whole has invested a huge amount in telematics products, sometimes known as black boxes. But let's be honest, things have moved on a long, long way since those first black boxes came out 20, 25 years ago. In our own telematics offering, we found that the best drivers who come through our programme are 80% less likely to have a bodily injury claim. Telematics is a real opportunity to incentivise good driving behaviour. And I look forward to hearing today ideas how we could work together with a range of other interventions to provide new solutions to the challenge of road safety. I'd encourage people to take photos. If you don't want photos taken of you, please shout if you see someone pointing a camera at you. And also, I'd ask you to actively post on any social media platforms. The more we can get the word out there, the better. We have a packed and exciting agenda. I hope that you all have an enjoyable and informative day, and I'm looking forward to speaking to many of you during the breaks as well. With that, I'll hand back to Jamie.
So next, I'd like to introduce the chair for our first two sessions, which is Dr. Nick Reed, founder of Reed Mobility. He was the National Highways' first Chief Road Safety Advisor, and he's currently working with DFT on their Science Advisory Council. He's got lots more hats, but I'm going to stop there. Nick.
Thank you, Jamie.
Do you want all the speakers to come now, or do you want to do them one at a time?
One at a time, I think it's fine, yeah. One at a time. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, as Jamie says, Nick Reed, Reed Mobility, independent consultant. Used to be head of mobility R&D at Bosch, and I was the first ever independent Chief Road Safety Advisor to National Highways. And speaking about Bosch, Bosch had a key person risk policy. So that meant they wouldn't allow the executives to all fly on the same flight. They would split the flights so that if the worst were to happen, they wouldn't lose all of the top bods at the organisation. And I was thinking as I looked through the agenda today, Jamie, there's a bit of a risk here. If a meteorite were to strike this building, then some of the brightest and best minds on the agenda and also in the audience actually from the road safety community in the UK would be lost. So God forbid that happens. But it just shows what a great event, great agenda we've got lined up for you today. So we're going to be talking about the safe vehicles element of the safe system in the first session today. And we know that the road casualty statistics over the last 15 years haven't been decreasing as much as we would like. And there are lots of reasons why that might be the case. It could be the changing size and mass of the vehicles that are out there on the roads. It could be to do with the increase in distractions and in-vehicle and portable technologies that are now available to us. It could be to do with the climate. Maybe we're seeing more intense, more frequent extreme weather conditions. Or it could be a change of the distribution of who is being affected by these collisions. And in this time, we've also been promised the growth of automated driving as well. And it's almost 10 years ago to the day that the first government-funded projects were launched where we were trialling different types of automated vehicle on the streets of Greenwich and Milton Keynes and Coventry and Bristol. And while we've made huge progress in terms of the regulatory environment, there are still no commercial automated vehicles out on the road today. So our session this morning will be looking at what can we expect from technology in terms of reducing the likelihood of death and serious injury on our roads. And we've got exactly the right people to go through that topic with us. And we start with Professor Richard Cuerden from TRL, the Academy Director and Honorary Professor from the University of Nottingham. Richard.
Thank you, Luke. Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Fantastic. I've got the slides working, look at that. I thought I'd try and take us back a little bit in time, if that's okay. I was lucky enough to be involved when Jamie, the pillars were just an idea. And somebody said to me, oh, well, if they had one for vehicles, what would be in it? And I thought I'd just start from there. And we thought these things should be in it. We thought there should be some minimum standards. Every vehicle sold anywhere in the world should be able to protect the occupant if they had a front impact or a side impact. We thought it'd be really, really important if you were a pedestrian or a cyclist and the vehicle hit you that you'd be offered some protection in the event of that collision. And of course, child seats and so on. There were other things as well for other vehicle types. These are for cars. There were some things for HGVs. And I know Matthew's going to talk about HGV safety too. So these are international standards. And I think we can all be proud. Certainly the UN Reg 94, 95, pedestrian protection, the child restraints, these were kind of UK-driven things that came through the European Commission and the European Union at that time and then ascended to be UN standards. So they were all standard in our vehicles that we were driving in 2014. So I just thought let's just timestamp 2014 because it's about 10 years ago. And let's look at our casualties. So on the x-axis and the bottom axis, you've got the age of the car drivers in this case. On the y-axis, you've got the numbers who are killed or seriously injured by age. And you can't see the male. The grey is male, the red is female. And I thought it'd be fun to compare with what had happened roughly 10 years earlier. So if we take the average of 10 years before that, we can see the reduction. So what you really see is that with all the work we've done, we've really helped young men. I'll come and talk about that in a moment. Now, I want you to think about this in a safe system because I'm not going to try and stick away from the safe pillar. Remember now, I'm comparing data from 2005 to 2009. And I'm just thinking perhaps about young drivers. Young drivers from 2002 had to do the hazard perception test. From 1996 had to do a theory test. So you've got a reasonably standard exposure. So we did some analysis and we found that based on the collisions that were happening between comparing 2014 with the average of 2005 to 2009, funnily enough, young men and young women people in general seem to be having the same number of collisions. What was changing was that you were less likely to be killed or seriously injured if you were in a newer car because of those minimum safety standards. And we could quantify that. We could say what percentage of casualties we were preventing because of the vehicle technology. And I can't emphasize that enough. It is so important to be able to design a regulation. If you need one, it's got to be robust. You don't just put it in place because it's you'd like it. It's got to be there for a reason. It's got to offer some value. And if it offers some value, it's got to be cost effective. You've used the evidence to develop that regulation, and then you monitor and evaluate to check it works. And if you don't do that, things will go wrong. So what happened after 2014? Around this time, we went to the European Commission and we had a good conversation with them about, there was a thing called the General Safety Regulations, which is where all of the safety regulations in Europe are bundled together. And the conversation went, and I think Nick was part of these conversations, we said, wouldn't it be a good idea to look at all of the measures that could be regulated for and to see what we could add to those minimum standards that would make life better compared to 2014, say to 2024. So we looked at over 60 measures. We took a full evidence review. How expensive are they? What evidence do we have that they work? We agreed with all the stakeholders. We had over 100 stakeholders. You agree with the industry, how much these things cost. You agree with all the rest of the industry, what the benefits are. You agree on what the papers are and what the data is. You take that through a great big system. You write through very, very, very long reports. You end up presenting to the European Parliament and Council, and they vote for general safety regulations too. What does that mean? It's the biggest single change in vehicle regulations anywhere in the world. And it's quite phenomenal. It came into force on the 5th of July 2022, and it's on all new vehicle types now, buses, coaches, cars, vans, HGVs, as of last year. And this is some of the measures. And for those of you who don't live in the world of vehicle regulation, an M1 is a passenger car, an N1 is a light van, an M3 is a bus, right? So you're just working up inside. M is passenger vehicle, N is commercial vehicle. And the measures that were put in place are quite complex, and they all overlap, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But before I do, let's just think about this one here, because Lillian mentioned it in her opening address. Intelligent speed assistance. It's such a crucial measure. What does it do? I'm sure you guys all know, but you have to have technology in the vehicle that can read road signs. Okay, and it reads the road sign and it informs the driver of the speed limit based on that information. And it says, hey, Richard, you're doing 35 and a 30. And it helps me understand that, helps me be a better driver and a slow down. It does not automatically slow for me in this system that's regulated. It's an advisory system. Most manufacturers have got map systems as well. But that is not part of the regulation at this time, and there's no regulation that requires the enforcement of a speed. When we presented to the European Parliament, we presented all of those different measures, including measures for a frontal impact test, which would make it, if you're actually a vehicle occupant and happen to be female, we thought we'd equal up the level of protection to men, right? There was a lot of measures in this package. We talked about it being a package of measures. The only thing, after a day of solid me briefing them and saying this is not about intelligent speed limiters, this is not about limiting speed, this package of messages, BBC, Sky News, every media outlet led with EU to speed limit. Every news outlet I was invited on was about how you as drivers were being punished and you wouldn't be allowed to exceed the speed limit. I was on various radio shows when it was explained to me by knowledgeable people that because they could speed, they'd not had collisions. Right, just think about that. Because they'd been able to accelerate out of trouble. And this became story, this became narrative. And it affected the ability for the UK government to mandate for these things. Because the stories matter to people. But they were stories, they weren't evidence-based. This is the world's most complicated slide, bear with me. But I think it's important we think of systems, we're in systems, okay? A lot of what I'm going to talk about now is systems in systems. So if you think about the safe system approach, that's everything. But in a vehicle, we've got systems, right? So the first measures on that long list we looked at were measures that would stop the crash happening in the first place. There's a danger that if we ran the impact assessment and we added up all the measures that would stop the crash and we said, this is how much they'd cost and this is how many casualties they'd save, these are the measures that would stop the injuries and this is how much they'd cost, we'd double count. Hopefully you can see that. Because if you stop the crash, you don't need some of the secondary safety because the crashes haven't happened. You've got to look at the crashes. So we looked at the the target population. We looked at intelligent speed assistance, we looked at driver distraction, we looked at all of the things that would stop the crash happening. We looked at the casualty data and we removed some of the collisions. The collisions that were left, we then said, let's apply the advanced automated braking and remove some of those collisions based on their effectiveness that we've agreed with industry and all the stakeholders, and what's left maybe at lower severity. So we're all driving now at a better speed, if I can term it in that way. If we don't have a crash, or if we do have a crash, the crash is more survivable because we've got the passive safety, the secondary safety measures too that come in. So we don't double count. The other thing we don't double count is if you've got an intelligent speed assistance system, you need a camera on the vehicle. I also need a camera to keep the vehicle in lane. Okay, I also need a camera to spot the pedestrian on the road. So I only put in the benefit, the impact assessment, one camera. I don't double count the costs either. If you do all of that, conservatively, you will save something like 25,000 lives through getting those minimum standards across Europe. I'll say that again, 25,000 lives, because these systems work together. The other thing that sold it, though, if I'm really honest, I was brilliant, obviously, at presenting this to the European Parliament. I was so convincing with the statistics. I had endless papers. We were gushing with all of this evidence. Ford Motor Company stood up and said this would be good for Europe and the supply chain, and they would be ready with the technologies, and they could see how this would lead in. That really helped my presentation when they said that, if I'm honest. This was about the money as well as the casualty savings. Now remember, not every technology is regulated, sorry. This was around, we could have chosen to add this to the general safety regulations. It's adaptive cruise control. The vehicle knows what's ahead of it. It manages its own lane and the vehicles. Very similar systems now we're talking about through the UN, and some speakers later in today, I think from Thatcham, Tom might talk about some of this in more detail. We don't have to regulate for everything all in one go. But you might need to decide you need to at some point, as Nick said. We might start to think about what distraction might be in some of these vehicles with different sorts of interfaces. This is not a regulated technology. Where does that take us to? So if you take that to the commercial area, we ran a program for National Highways, Department for Transport, and the program was about platooning HGVs. Okay, so this is about saving the planet in its broader sense, right? We want to reduce emissions. We want to take some of the really harmful greenhouse gas emissions that are coming out of our truck fleets. And to do that, if you can drive vehicles together, very close together, in a safe way, you can slipstream and you can reduce the fuel. And you do that by having computers on the vehicles and connectivity that takes the driver out of the loop in the following trucks. Driver of truck 1 drives, drivers in truck 2 and 3, they're driving laterally, but the computer is bringing them very close to the vehicle in front. This was our experimental design. So we had the trucks about 0.8 seconds apart, and then we compared how much fuel saving we got at 0.8 seconds apart with if those trucks were on adaptive cruise control, as the car had shown you earlier. The adaptive cruise control, by the way, on a standard truck is 1.6 second gap. And I know you all know your highway code, which says that we should be 2 seconds apart. Okay, so we're already comparing with a situation which isn't part of a safe system, or if it is, it's contradictory. But let's just ignore that for now because we're running an experiment. So you put those trucks on the road and you can generally save fuel. You can't platoon in all the time though, because there's slip roads and things and people get in the way. But if you imagine a world when you can platoon all the time because you want to design a transport system, you could really start to affect how much savings you could make in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And platooning was safer than the adaptive cruise control situation. So you can get cleaner and you can get safer. But you've got to work together. You've got to build the models, the rationale to do that. So I'm coming to my summary, I promise. So where do I think we've got to in the last 20 or 30 years? I think for vehicle occupants, we've done a phenomenal job. There's lots more we can do. And some of the speakers are going to talk more about that. But I can show you my work and lots of work out there where we can demonstrate how we've reduced casualties for in-vehicle. I'm less positive about cyclists, pedestrians, and other vulnerable road users. It's a real struggle to find the evidence that certainly in the event of a collision, we've designed vehicles to be safer for those guys, or as safe as they could be. And if we're going to reduce the journeys we're taking, we're going to have more cycling and walking. We've absolutely got to prioritise that. This was me showing off. I like to show off, as you probably realise. So I went to a shop and tried out an e-scooter a few years ago when you could do that sort of thing. You could buy this particular e-scooter for £300. I think it did 25 kilometres per hour from memory, and I could walk out of the shop with it. Obviously, I could only ride it on my own private land. The world's changing. There's going to be speakers who are going to follow me who are going to talk about how trucks, buses, automated vehicles are going to become part of the mix. We're going to see an ageing population. Okay, there's going to be lots of change happening out there. And the backdrop to any change we want to see happen is that for the vehicle side of all of what we're talking about, this is a multi-billion pound industry. There are regulators in different parts of the world. We now have GB type approval. I think it would be dangerous for us to think we in Great Britain, the UK, are going to do this on our own. We're going to have to work internationally, especially if you think about cybersecurity and automation. And my last point really I wanted to make was we've traditionally not been very, well, in my opinion, right, this is an opinion that I'm open to be challenged on, I don't think we're very good at designing our spaces, the places we want to go to and live, and designing transport. If I look at most new housing developments, I'm not seeing the right level of thinking, the right ambition, frankly. If I look at city centres, as long as we keep that disconnect, we don't design what we want to look for, we're not going to have the vehicles that are going to serve the purpose. The vehicle will dictate what it looks like. And then it's very, very difficult to work in a system and design casualties and emissions out of that system. That was my final point. I will stop there. Thank you, Nick. Is it questions now?
We're going to do a combined Q&A at the end of the session. So if you've got questions for Richard, save those up, write them down, and then we'll fire them at him later. I'm often struck, look around you, everything in this room, everything you engage with on a daily basis has probably been in at least one truck, probably more. And when we think about the safety of trucks, I can think of no better person to talk about it than our next speaker, which is Matthew Avery, who is the Director of Strategic Development for Euro NCAP. Matthew.
Thank you. Right, well, good morning, everybody. Right, let's find a slide first. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'm here to talk about HGV safety, or I can actually call them lorries in this audience. Wherever I go around the world, I mention lorries and I get completely bemused faces, so I have to use the term truck or heavy goods vehicle, but for this audience, I can talk about lorries. It's good. So, the main point, I suppose, we're making here is around the advancement of vehicle technology and safety. And Richard showed you some of the statistics about how the roads have become safer, especially for car occupants, especially for male occupants. I think Euro NCAP would like to claim some of that advance because I think, as everyone knows, we for 28 years have been pushing forward vehicle manufacturers. And of course, Euro NCAP is voluntary, and the great thing about the difference between a voluntary market and a regulated market is that it's up to vehicle manufacturers, and therefore the consumer is driving the argument. So if you show the consumer a poor performing vehicle and a good performing vehicle, they're more likely to choose the good performing vehicle, and this drives the market. So we create a market for safety, and that's been so beneficial, I think. We now have about 75% of our vehicles are 5-star vehicles, and every few years, if someone's coming in, maybe someone's coming in. Every 3 years, we continue to lift the bar to make sure that 5 stars is driving more and more safety on vehicles. And obviously, for 25 years, we've been focusing on passenger cars. But in 2020, we noticed this. around the problems of commercial vehicles. So if you look on the left-hand side, you can see a Nissan car, about £25,000 worth, and you can see all of the safety equipment fitted as standard on that vehicle. You can see those green blobs. If you look on the right-hand side, there's a £25,000 Nissan van with no technology on at all, and very, very little of it even being available if it's an option, which is in the orange. So in other words, there was a huge problem with commercial vehicles, especially with vans. So it's something that we began tackling in 2020, and now in 2025, most of the new vans we see are, in effect, 5-star vehicles. The manufacturers have already moved in that time and are fitting most of this equipment on as standard because they're required to fit it as standard in our latest requirements. So it's been really, really effective. Now, we have had GSR2 in the middle of that, which obviously forces a minimum level of safety, but as always, Euro NCAP goes above and beyond. So if you are just compliant with regulation in Euro NCAP for whatever vehicle you're producing, you will be a 0-star vehicle. So Euro NCAP always goes above and beyond regulation. But what about trucks? What about lorries? Well, the biggest issue about lorries is, firstly, they're very, very important for GDP. They're very, very important for the economic development of countries. When we talked about trucks initially, a lot of people are saying, well, just get them off the roads and then there won't be a safety issue. 98% of everything you own has come to you via a truck. So it's extremely important to understand we need trucks, but we need safer trucks. The other issue is around their exposure. Although only 3% of the fleet are heavy goods vehicles, they're responsible, involved in 15% of all fatal crashes. So in other words, there's an overexposure of heavy vehicles in fatal crashes. And whilst those new requirements have gone into GSR2, requiring a minimum level of safety, that isn't nearly enough, and many manufacturers go above and beyond that. And the key thing also is that 90% of the casualties are external to the heavy goods vehicle. They are not the driver casualties, they are third parties around them. And of those driver casualties, half of those are unbelted. So if we just mandated belts, I mean it is a mandation, but if we just forced the driver to use the seatbelt, we will cut those driver fatalities by something like half. So here are some stats around what we've been considering. And the key thing here is if you just look at the red, you can see the overexposure of drivers and occupants of cars when they're involved in collisions, with crashes with heavy goods vehicles. But there's also a difference between city environments and in urban environments or on motorways. So we need to have different technologies and different strategies for the different environments. So if we dig deeper, we can see that the vast majority of fatalities and serious injuries of car occupants occur on highways, on our motorways. And if we look at cities, it's vulnerable road users, it's pedestrians, it's powered two-wheelers, and it's cyclists. So we need to have strategies that address those two collision types specifically. So we're designing, or we've designed a safety rating that reflects that and obviously encourages manufacturers and also recognises those manufacturers who are putting technologies on specific to, for instance, city environments. Now, it can't have escaped your knowledge that most of what Euro NCAP does is focused on the consumer. You and I at home considering buying a new vehicle, and it's about protecting our families and choosing a 5-star vehicle. It's obviously very different when it comes to the motivation for buying a vehicle which is doing a job of work. So we have a safety ecosystem, and this is a sort of new approach for Euro NCAP, and this is specifically aimed at van users, van buyers, and truck users and buyers. So on the left-hand side, we are engaging with stakeholders from cities like Transport for London, and they're involved in the Euro NCAP process. We're dealing with national government. We've got National Highways. They are a member of Euro NCAP now because they're so interested in encouraging safer commercial vehicles. And we're dealing with those organisations throughout Europe under the auspices of Polis or CEDA. So road authorities are very important because in London they can control the vehicles that are on their roads, and there's something called the DVS standard which drives a minimum level of visibility or technology on vehicles. So they're very important stakeholders. We're also talking to shippers, so those are the people who are moving goods. Their brand is on the vehicle but they don't own the vehicle. So IKEA, they have 95,000 freight movements an hour in the UK, and those freight movements are under their brand, but it's somebody else's vehicle that is moving those goods. So they're very important stakeholders in the whole ecosystem because they've got brand management to think about. If there's a collision and it's an IKEA branded truck, it looks bad for IKEA. So they've got to think about brand management and reputational risk. We're also dealing directly with the operators. We've got some great information from operators directly in detail into the sorts of crashes that their vehicles have. And in-vehicle monitoring and telematic systems are very, very useful there. But obviously they've got obligations to the safety of their drivers. And therefore they're encouraged to be buying the safer vehicle as possible to protect their drivers. Also dealing with insurers. Aviva are not members yet, but we have 2 insurers who are members of Euro NCAP who are specifically interested in commercial vehicle safety, and they're helping to drive the testing requirements to make sure that insurers are covered. But it's also giving them granular information as to the performance of these vehicles. So they're using that for the first time in underwriting. And we're obviously talking to the vehicle manufacturers. So we have 10 specific tests and evaluations that we're doing. On the right-hand side, their tests that we do are very, very similar to the ones that we have in vans and cars. They will be familiar to you: lane support, AEB, driver monitoring systems. But on the left-hand side, we have several unique tests reflecting the casualties that occur specifically with trucks. That's especially AEB cyclist at junctions, and you'll see some video of that in a moment. The other thing we're looking at and integrating is vision, direct vision. Now, this is already part of the London requirements, and we've embedded this into our requirements because it's so important, and several manufacturers are really pushing forward in terms of improving direct vision. So it's part and parcel of the solution. So I mentioned that we have a rating approach. We have a rating approach that aligns with our car system, aligns with our van system, but we've got 2 special highlights. One is around EVs, because cities are very interested in encouraging EVs, so we highlight that particular element, but also there's a separate city safe label, and that's really to highlight a vehicle is very good and suitable for city environment. It's got technologies on that can address those specific crashes. So some of these tests, these will be fairly familiar to you. That's loud. It's loud for the driver. So that's an AEB test that was undertaken at MIRA, who are one of our test laboratories. And that's a straight AEB test. Here is development of pedestrian test by our friends in Germany at BAST. And you can see there's a production vehicle with a pedestrian AEB system. And here is development of that turn across path test. Again, this was undertaken at MIRA. You can see the cyclist on the near side, and the truck goes to turn into the junction. The driver hasn't seen the cyclist, the vehicle turns and it automatically brakes to avoid that collision. So there are only two manufacturers, Volvo and Mercedes, with that technology. We want to see all trucks with this technology, and obviously that's what we do within NCAP, encourage manufacturers to achieve 5-star ratings by fitting this sort of technology. I'll just let that play out. And we're also looking at highway crashes, as I said, so here is some of our lane support crashes. Here the vehicle senses that there's a vehicle next to it, the driver tries to move into the path, and the vehicle is automatically steered back into the lane, an emergency lane keeping function. And it was one of these crash types that one of the operators we're dealing with, who we showed the early development of the test procedure, said, no, this is wrong, you've done this the wrong way, and actually showed us video footage of actual collisions, and we modified the test to reflect that. So working with the operators is hugely beneficial, because we can use that to define what's required for the test. Other things we're looking at, direct vision. So if you look at that truck on the top right-hand side, a DAF vehicle, has a very low belt line, very large area of glass. The driver can see significantly more than the previous generation DAF truck. And we're also encouraging e-mirrors or CMS, camera monitoring systems. They're very good. They enhance the vision for the driver. They enhance the direct vision so the driver can see more because there aren't mirrors in the way. And they can also have an adaptive view, so as the truck is turning, the mirror can pan round and actually show what's around the driver a lot more. And once drivers are used to these systems, they don't want to go back. So initially we've seen some pushback, but once drivers are familiar with these systems, they do like them. So this is the rating system. This is the point score if you want to get technical, but you can see we have 4 pillars that we talk about. Safe driving, that's the hours before a collision. Crash avoidance, that's the seconds before a crash, where AEB systems and light can intervene and mitigate the crash. Crash protection, that's the milliseconds before a crash, where airbags and seatbelts are going to help. And then post-crash, the golden hour. So it's all based on the timeline. You can see we've got nothing in Pillar 3 because we're not doing passive safety testing until 2031. But then we'll introduce a physical passive crash test. But you can see that vision makes up 50% of the points in the safe driving column, and 60% of the points are pedestrian and car AEB in our crash avoidance. Now, to get 5 stars, you have to be 80% in each pillar. So the pillar score gives your overall star rating. So if you've only got 20% in one pillar, you will only be a 1-star truck. So we drive manufacturers to do well in all areas, not just good vision or not just collision avoidance. They've got to be good across the board. And there's a balanced approach. I mentioned city safety. So you have to do well in any of those 2 boxes. So you have to have good vision, direct and indirect vision, and you have to have a good AEB system, either for cars and pedestrians or in those low-speed turning collisions, the cyclist turn across path collisions. And we've done this because some manufacturers currently have invested heavily in vision. I mentioned DAF. They're on the left-hand side, very good vision, okay in terms of AEB, but nothing in terms of low-speed turn collisions. Whereas Mercedes do very well in terms of the technology, but their vision is not the best. So we're trying to offer different solutions to the manufacturer. You can do it with technology, you can do it with direct vision, but ultimately you will have to have both. So that slide has gone slightly skew, but this is vehicle selection by sector. So we're testing vehicles in different sectors. So we've got long haul on the left, then distribution, then construction, then utility, and those are broken down. And you can see the straps on the side when we've done these ratings for these different trucks. So the next trucks we're doing are fleet rigids, and then we move into urban distribution and city trucks later this year. So this is a very important communication to the manufacturers because it puts them on notice as to what they have to do to get 5 stars in the future. Very important part because it takes a long time for all of the manufacturers to develop these systems. So this was our first release. These are the most common fleet tractor units from manufacturers that are widely available in the UK. And here are our first results. Now, these results were an eye-opener for many manufacturers and many hauliers. You can see we've got that DAF at the top. It's a 3-star truck, but it's a city-safe truck, so that's very good. We've got our 1-star truck, which is an Iveco S-Way. That's a vehicle that really just has regulation. GSR2 regulation, but doesn't really go beyond that, which is why that is a 1-star truck. And then if you look at the bottom, we've got 2 5-star trucks, Volvo. So they are producing vehicles with good vision and that technology. So the clear message here is manufacturers can already do this. We get challenges all the time saying we can't do this, we can't put this in the market, we can't afford this. Well, Volvo do. And the Volvo trucks are the safest trucks that we have tested. And of course, this is a clear message to the other manufacturers, you can do better. And guess what? They're already engaging and saying, oh, please retest our truck because we can do it better. So we're already driving the market beyond GSR2. Now, I mentioned passive safety. We're developing new tests for passive safety. Oh dear, it's not going to... This should be edited, this video, but you're going to see the whole thing. I don't know what's happened there, but it is cut down. I think you know what's going to happen. So this is a 5-star Euro NCAP vehicle. This is a 5-star car in a collision with a truck. And this is part of the development work of our 2031 test. So you'll see it on the right-hand side as well. These are supposed to be synced, this video, but never mind. Sorry, it was edited, but you're going to have to watch the run-up as well. But what I want you to notice is in this collision, so both of these vehicles are at 30 miles an hour. This is a very, very common situation on an A road, and it will meet the truck and see what happens to the truck. It just carries on. The speed reduction there was about 6 kilometers per hour because of the momentum. It just keeps going. And the car looked like this. So that's a 5-star car. That's overloaded the occupant compartment. So the injury results are much worse than we see from the actual Euro NCAP test. But it's illustrative of the problem. So obviously what we're trying to do is encourage manufacturers for the future in 2031 to improve passive safety protection. Now there are opportunities for us. There's a new elongated cab rule, which I won't go into details, but it's Article 9A. But you can see the front of those vehicles are sloped down. They're sloped down for aerodynamic reasons, increases efficiency. It improves fuel consumption by about 5%. If you look at the tests that have been done with against vehicles with flat fronts, and even in the convoy system, you can see that this improves fuel economy to a greater degree. So most manufacturers are utilising this. This is even more efficient, if you like, than the platooning. But you can see that space at the front, behind the grille, behind the headlights, is currently just open, and that's the area we can add the passive safety protection. But we're also looking at pedestrian protection to get rid of wiper bosses and elements that stick out in front of the vehicle to make them more pedestrian safety. Future developments. We're moving ahead, looking at other commercial vehicles, and we're moving into bus and coach. And luckily, my former colleague, Alix Edwards, will be talking to you about this, because she's already done some of the groundwork for us, which is really useful. So we should be able to integrate this by 2028 to look at the other vehicles in the fleet. Because if we're going to deliver Vision Zero, we need every single vehicle in the fleet to be as safe as possible. We can't just focus on cars or vans or trucks or buses. We need the whole safe system approach. And with that, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matthew. As ever, super professional. You've almost done my job for me. Next speaker. Well, I mean, global pandemics notwithstanding, previous government and current government is encouraging bus use. And someone who's done a huge amount of work to develop the standards that are now being applied by Transport for London and adopted by others potentially in future is the next speaker, Alix Edwards. So Alix, please come and tell us about it.
Hello everyone, thank you for that introduction, Nick. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Okay. Better? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to talk about bus safety and reducing casualties. I'm going to whiz you through these topics, and I am going to talk about regulation and standards and things, but not in huge masses of detail, more about how they're used to influence the bus market. So whichever version of trying to influence bus design you're looking at, whether it's regulations or procurement standards or ISO standards, doesn't matter which one of those you're looking at. Any good research organisation or regulatory body or whatever will always work through this type of process, focusing on the problem set in the casualty statistics, then identifying potential counter causation, and then potential countermeasures for those, then looking at the test and specifications, and then finally for buses, obviously the implementation of these things is very important. You've got the installation, operational changes, many of these things. So that's the basis upon which all of these standards and procurement tools are built, and that's a recurring theme whichever way you look at it. You know, Richard's talked about the evidence base, Matthew's talked about the evidence base. It all stems from there. So regulations, obviously they are mandatory requirements. There's a handful of examples on the right. I have not tried to list all of them. I will not list them all off to you. We'd be here a very long time. My point is that there's a variety. Some of them are global, some of them are European, some of them are GB requirements. The slight difference is in bus operations that often the volumes of vehicles are a lot smaller, so they don't necessarily have to produce in accordance with the GSR regulations that Richard mentioned earlier. So it's those are the regulations for getting new vehicles on the road, kind of the basic requirements. Over and above that, there's often international standards. ISO standards are a really great example for the bus driver cab design standard, which is followed very, very widely through the bus industry. But it's an international standard. It's bringing that consistency of approach. That's great, that's wonderful, but it's not actually enforced by anyone. It's voluntary, whether these bus manufacturers pick that up and follow that guidance. No one checks it. Then there's a layer that is consumer testing, Euro NCAP, as Matthew's mentioned, and that's, again, raising the standards above regulation and building in best practice. It's influencing the sales of the vehicles and driving vehicle design improvements that way. As Matthew mentioned, they're planning to go into buses, but there's nothing as yet that has been influencing bus design from Euro NCAP. Then we've got things like procurement tools. So by that I mean the specifications that a transport authority, such as Transport for London, would set. Often that's a minimum specification that they set, but that's still over and above regulation. So those work and influence the bus industry because they kind of force every manufacturer and operator of buses to comply with that spec. If they don't follow that spec, they can't win the contract to operate buses in London. So it becomes mandatory without actually being regulatory. But of course, it depends on the Transport Authority to set those specifications. It's up to them whether they do that type of thing or not. So at that point, that's a voluntary thing. So that's the first 2 points up there. So Transport for London have, that's my experience base, so that's what I'm going to talk about. They have set their own specifications in bus safety standard. That was launched in 2018. That's a much faster pace than regulation, but they do that at some risk. If they, for example, they might set a specification and then regulation comes in later that is slightly conflicting. So there's a challenge there. It's hard for transport authorities to do this type of work. They also have to do all of that evidence-based to set those specifications, but then they also have to check that those buses are conforming to those specifications. So it's quite an effort to produce this work. So, as I mentioned, Transport for London have launched their bus safety standard in 2018. They have an overall target that no one is killed in or by a London bus by 2030. They've worked through, on the right-hand side, as I say, they've worked through that type of process looking at the evidence base. I'm not going to repeat that because I've mentioned that earlier. And then this slide is just giving you an overview of the type of categories that they have introduced measures in. Many of them are in driver assist, so focusing on helping the driver to avoid or mitigate the severity of incidents. That can be AB, ISA that Richard mentioned, vision that Matthew's already mentioned, but also the bottom two, runaway bus prevention and pedal application error, much more rare, but with a high risk of severe outcomes. Top right, you've got partner assist, so that's helping other road users not to get in a crash. In this case, it's acoustic vehicle alerting system. I've got a slide on that in a moment, so I won't go further. And then the bottom two are about protecting people if there has been a crash. So protecting other road users and then protecting the occupants of the buses, the drivers and the passengers. And all of that work was compiled into this extensive roadmap, which is their tools for informing the industry what is required by when, so that the industry, the bus manufacturers and operators have time to respond and to develop these systems and be sure that they're ready to meet these specifications. There's a lot on there. It was a very busy research programme. We'll see how much ends up in Matthew's Euro NCAP version. So I wanted to just pick out 2 or 3 examples, just, because it helps to just make it a bit more real. So the camera monitor systems are all about improving the vision for drivers. Obviously, in a bus, you've got great direct vision, lovely lot of windscreen, it's nice, and there's great direct vision, but improving the indirect vision for the close proximity around the bus is very important. The first thing TfL have done is specify blind spot mirrors. That was a brief requirement because then the camera monitor system came in and replaced that. That's the image on the right. So the other advantage there is not just about improving the indirect vision, but by removing the side mirrors, you then remove your problem of the side mirrors striking people on the head. So it's also a partner protection measure in tandem. So one technology addressing two types of issue. And in the future, they're going to be looking at integrating further messaging, the blind spot information systems, into those camera monitor systems too. Here's your video. So acoustic vehicle alerting system, they explain it really well and it has the sound, so I will just let it
In 2019,
work.
we introduced the acoustic vehicle alerting system. This technology provides an artificial sound so that quiet running buses are audible to road users outside the bus. This is particularly for people who are blind and visually impaired. We introduced this on London buses 2 years ahead of the regulatory requirement for all quiet running vehicles, such as electric buses. We improved acoustic conspicuity compared to a diesel bus through the development of a unique urban bus sound for London buses that aims to ensure the sound is distinguishable over typical city background noise. In developing this, we work closely with bus operators, bus manufacturers, suppliers, and a range of stakeholders including bus users, pedestrians, and blind and visually impaired people. The urban bus sound consists of two components, a call sound and a beacon sound. The call sound plays at all times when the vehicle is switched on, including when the bus is stationary. The beacon sound plays only when the bus is moving, both forwards and backwards up to 12 miles per hour. Since 2023, a responsive acoustic vehicle alerting system has been required on new buses. This adjusts the sound levels according to the background environment noise, increasing the volume in busy areas and lowering it in quiet areas.
So the other thing they're doing is licensing that sound so that other areas in the UK can use it, so it becomes an urban bus sound rather than just a London bus sound. And then I'm going to talk about front-end design, which Matthew's also touched on. There's a lot of common themes amongst what we're talking about, which is great. So you can see this picture with the two buses here. The one on the left is a typical older style geometry with a very vertical bus front. On the right, you've got a more curved shape there. And really that measure, that requirement for that change in bus front design, the shape of buses, was about deflecting pedestrians and cyclists out of the way to try and prevent them from being sucked under and run over the bus, because obviously if you're run over, that's a far worse outcome. So that is, it's not very technology, it's the shape of the bus. My point here is the link with technology, that by implementing ISA at the same time and preventing speeding, and implementing AEB at the same time to bring in emergency braking if the driver's unresponsive, that can bring the speed down and lower the risk of injury. And then further, if the pedestrian is unfortunately hit, then the shape of the bus should help protect them as well. So it's that combination with technology in this example. Okay, that's about it really. I have whizzed you through some of the influences on bus design, regulation standards and procurement standards. I think that those different types of things all work together, and it sets us a lot of challenges as to how to make that keep working for the future of bus safety. How do we keep challenging the bus manufacturers to keep responding and improving technology and adopting it in the market? What aspects of TfL or other transport authorities' bus safety standards can be used to then influence regulation design or ISO standard design, for example? What are they learning and can bring to that evidence base? And then how can these types of bus safety standards be rolled out far more widely nationally? by increasing the evidence base and getting more experience from the national market, it brings more evidence to justify further action. And it helps to bring the economies of scale with manufacturers more confident of a greater market. They're more likely to invest in these types of safety changes. And the final point really is that a lot of places, operators, transport authorities now are looking at franchising, and there's a lot of interest in zero emission fleets. Absolutely the right thing to do, but alongside that, how can we also keep the safety requirements in there alongside emissions? Because obviously those zero emission buses are quite expensive, so let's keep them on the road for longer. Let's not have them off the road being repaired, having had crashes. So yeah, there's quite a lot of challenges, I think, in continuing to improve bus safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That's fantastic. Next up, we've got, Honda is a brand known to everyone here and known for its association with both innovation and safety. And I think that was evidenced by the announcement at the ministerial conference, the Global Ministerial Conference in Marrakesh, their partnership, first manufacturer to partner with the UN Road Safety Fund, and their commitment to elimination of death by users of Honda vehicles by 2050. And I think that's particularly interesting as well, because you don't forget Honda manufactures cars, but also some very nice motorbikes as well. So the challenge of creating safety for that environment as well. So we welcome Patrick Keating, Head of Government Affairs for Honda.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm here to talk about Honda's vision for our route towards zero fatalities with Honda mobility products by 2050. And I think the point you were making just now is exactly right on. We are not a car company, we're a motorcycle company that happens to make cars. So motorcycles are very much at the heart of our approach to this journey, and a very different approach to motorcycles, I think, than what we see with some of the previous presentations. Obviously, there's that focus on protecting vulnerable road users, but also focus on rider behavior and maybe a different approach to technology. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Patrick Keating. I'm Head of Government Affairs at Honda Motor Europe. I'm not a technology guy, I'm a policy guy. I'm here delegating for my colleague Victoria Friend, who's our Head of Sustainability and Safety at Honda Motor Europe. She couldn't be here with us today, but I think she's watching online, so I'll be very careful to make sure I say all the right things. So I'll just click on with the slides. Excellent. So for those who may not be aware, let me tell you a little bit about Honda. From our humble beginnings 75 years ago, when Soichiro Honda, our founder, engineered a power-assisted motorcycle to help his wife with the daily shopping chores. Apparently, Mr. Honda lived at the top of the hill. The shop was at the bottom of the hill. And I think he wasn't very progressive, because rather than going down and helping his wife carry the groceries up with him, he rather invented a new piece of technology. But that's the starting point, and we've gone a long way since then. Last year, Honda sales exceeded 26.7 million units of equipment across cars, motorcycles, power equipment, but other products as well, such as aeroplanes. And we're moving into new areas as well, such as hydrogen, new energy management systems, software-assisted vehicles and products. But now we have another dream, and that dream is to achieve zero by 2050. That means carbon neutrality. That means zero fatalities involving Honda mobility products worldwide. And this is a huge challenge, but what are we doing to realize that dream? Honda's slogan of safety for everyone reflects our company's commitment to pursuing safety personalized to each individual. There's no one-fits-all solution. And it is our belief that by improving safety, every member of society will benefit and deliver a safer society as a whole. At the core of the Honda philosophy is our belief and our commitment to be a company that society wants to exist. And a key part of that is delivering safety. It's a sad fact that 1.3 million people are killed annually in traffic accidents, and motorcycle and automobile accidents combined account for about 60% of the world's traffic fatalities. Today, to tackle this issue, oops, I've gone too far. Honda has been focusing on two elements. The first, and one we've heard a lot about today, is about the role of technology. Honda's Sensing 360 system is becoming more and more standard on our vehicles, which provides a holistic suite of safety tools. But the second point, and I think this is a unique point and a unique strength for Honda, is that focus on training, particularly training our motorcycle riders. The Honda Safety Institute in Barcelona has educated more than 30,000 motorcyclists since 2009, and they've gained the European quality label for motorcycle training. And we can watch now a short video of how the team at Honda Barcelona provide this training and the impact it has for our customers. Dead.
Para disfrutar al máximo de la sensación de conducir una motocicleta, debes saber cómo llevarla en cualquier situación. Por eso existe el Honda Instituto de Seguridad, para proporcionar esa confianza a motoristas de todas las edades. Me llamo Ferran Roca y tengo el orgullo de ayudar a otros motoristas a velar por su seguridad. En el Honda Instituto de Seguridad llevamos formando motoristas desde 2009. Contamos con 20.000 metros cuadrados de pistas e instalaciones destinadas a la formación, tanto en la carretera como fuera de ella. Durante este tiempo, 25.000 motoristas han realizado algún curso con nosotros, todos ellos de la mano de un equipo de instructores experimentados de la Honda Escuela de Conducción. Todos creemos que el sueño de Honda de un futuro sin accidentes es alcanzable. El GIS es una instalación única en Europa diseñada en exclusiva para la formación de motoristas que cuenta con un amplio programa formativo para cubrir desde niños hasta motoristas expertos.
El GIS es importante porque intenta que las calles de las ciudades y las carreteras sean espacios más seguros, que los moteros tengan menos posibilidades de sufrir un percance durante su conducción.
Me encanta ver la rapidez de evolución de los alumnos, cómo aprovechan nuestras explicaciones y cómo las aplican para llegar a ser mejores conductores.
Los comentarios que recibimos son siempre positivos, la gente sale muy contenta y agradecida de nuestra formación.
Honda se esfuerza desde hace muchos años en apoyar la formación de motoristas. Dada su condición de primer fabricante de motocicletas del mundo, lo considera una responsabilidad prioritaria.
La sensación de libertad al conducir una motocicleta solo se puede disfrutar de verdad cuando el motorista y su moto forman una unidad. Nuestros cursos te enseñan a gozar de esa libertad. En Honda no nos limitamos a soñar con un mundo sin accidente de tráfico. Hacemos esto porque sabemos que podemos convertir ese sueño en realidad.
Thanks. It's really exciting, that centre in Barcelona. And if you're ever in Barcelona, welcome you to take the opportunity to visit. Or for those of you who happen to be motorcyclists, do take up any opportunities there are for additional further rider training. That's key to safety. Barcelona is one of our key safety sites. We have other 3 dedicated rider training schools across Europe. That includes a centre in Turkey. And we have partnerships with other agencies, other training schools across the European region, including here in the UK. And that approach is tailored to different local realities in different countries. So for instance, in Turkey, we've had a training site there since 2005 that has about capacity for training 2,000 riders a year. But we have slightly different challenges in Turkey. So it's less about road safety, but more about rider behavior. So for instance, emphasizing the importance of wearing helmets, emphasizing the importance of working around pedestrians, especially for children. We've identified in Turkey a worrying high rate of accidents for pedestrians for children under 9. So that's a gap that we're trying to address. And part of that was by providing each new Honda Turkey motorcycle customer with a keychain with a QR code that you could scan when you purchase the vehicle, and that would give you some online safety tips to help try and identify and address some of those gaps. As well, the Motorcycle Centre started an outreach program with schools trying to work with everyone to help keep people safe. So educating the children and the young people, as well as the drivers, to have that holistic approach. But doing this training physically in physical centres does have limited reach. So we're working to try and find ways to extend that out to a broader community of people through potentially new digital channels. So watch this space to see how that develops. But that's where we are now. At Honda, we never stand still. We're moving towards the challenging goal of 0 fatalities by 2050. And Honda understands that collaboration is key to achieving this goal. I think we've seen that through the presentations we've seen already this morning. This isn't about one stakeholder, it's about a system, to coin a phrase, where everyone is connected. And we're talking about risk identification for vulnerable road users. But what if the technology, and what if some of the newer technologies, such as AI, could help do that for you? So Honda has been working on a program called Safe and Sound Network Technology for a number of years now. And this next video will show us how the system works.
Safety for everyone. To reach 0 traffic collision fatalities by the year 2050. Honda has been developing technology to better understand people. With our Safe and Sound Network technology, everyone on the road can work together to create an environment that lets us all experience the joy of mobility. This is what we strive for. Every traffic participant has a different set of circumstances. Each individual's driving habits, their emotional and physical condition, the ever-shifting levels of risk in the traffic environment. All of these are interconnected, and sometimes we simply can't predict the consequences. With Safe and Sound Network technology, mobility keeps constant track of the driver's condition, as well as environmental factors on and around the road. That information is transmitted and collected into a server, and the real-world driving environment is recreated virtually. In this virtual space, people's circumstances and tendencies are taken into account, and the potential for high-risk situations can be predicted. First, an impatient motorcyclist's actions are instantaneously predicted, then simulated in the virtual environment. Next, the subsequent chain of events caused by that motorcyclist's actions are predicted and environmental risks assessed. A simulation is run, and information needed to help reduce risk is relayed back. When the simulation is complete, every traffic participant potentially at risk of an accident is provided with this support information and prompted to take action to preemptively avoid risk. Connected via this network, everyone works together to eliminate risks on the road so that we can all experience the joy of mobility. We at Honda are striving to provide safety suited to each individual, and together with our customers, to increase the total amount of social safety. Safety for everyone.
So, really exciting developments in terms of technology there, but for that technology to work, you need all of these systems to be compatible, cooperable, and interoperable. And we're seeing some of that discussion happening at European level now around the discussion whether it's G5 or 5G for some of these safety technologies. So there is a role for the regulator to step in and help provide a framework and guidance to make sure that each operator isn't acting individually. But also, as we saw in that video, it still relied on the driver in the end to make a decision and take action to avoid the accident. But what if you could combine those sensors, combine that infrastructure, combine that autonomous driving with AI learning so that the AI is also contributing to the hazard perception? And that's Honda's dream with the new Honda Zero technology. So the Zero series is a new upcoming series of electric vehicles being released by Honda globally, but into the European market in model year 2026. And this short video should tell us a little bit more about that. And this hasn't come with sound, so I'll just talk over it. But I think you'll see here the vision of a vehicle that's very futuristic, that's combining software design, software-enabled systems, AI, to deliver that additional safety. And we've seen throughout the presentation today some examples of how these safety systems work together, some of the technology that we're delivering, the focus on rider and driver behavior and training, but also still going to the future. There's still huge opportunities for further collaboration, for working together. And I think our key message from this is we as a company are working to deliver the technology, we're working to support our customers, but we can't do this alone. We need the support of all other stakeholders. From that high level around discussions around technology and infrastructure, but also down to a very practical nitty-gritty set of issues. A lot of this autonomous technology relies on looking at white lines painted on a road. If we have a system, a state, budgets where we don't have well-maintained roadways, a lot of this goes away. So we need that holistic approach. And I think that would be the message I've delivered to Lillian if she'd been here in person, but I'll try and catch up with her later. So thank you for that. Looking forward to the conversation later on.
Brilliant, thank you, Patrick. And so we had a bit of history from Richard. We had some trucks, we've had some buses, we've had some motorbikes, and now we have the future from Tom Leggett, who's the Vehicle Technology Manager at Thatcham, obviously very well known in the insurance sector and, of course, with the Euro NCAP testing that they do as well. Tom.
Great, thank you, Nick. Let's try and get the slide up. So hopefully most of you have heard of Thatcham Research, but if you haven't, we are funded by the UK motor insurance industry, and we do kind of independent research on their behalf. We look at three kind of core pillars, if you like: safety, security, and repair. You've probably heard about Thatcham's alarms, but we actually do a lot more than that as well. I'll obviously be focusing on safety. And I'm going to try and give you a little bit of a look maybe over the horizon. So my role is very much looking at all of that new technology, what we think that's going to mean for us as Thatcham and our insurer members, and really what we can do about it. So do we promote, do we investigate, do we research? Do we perhaps raise the red flag on the certain technologies as well? So automation is something that I've been lucky enough to attend an awful lot of conversations about, again in PACTS or other government conversations. For me, the biggest risk for automation really is about that access to data. Whenever I talk about access to data, lots of people kind of recoil, particularly anyone who's developing these systems or hoping to kind of do any deployments. Why? Because that data is so valuable. Not only to kind of develop and make sure these systems are actually safe during the R&D cycle, but also at the end of it, when and if we get any actual proper deployments of automation in the UK, that data, again, is so valuable to those developers because they can frankly monetize it. We are, I think, at the moment kind of culturally going through a bit of a data kind of revolution. I think all of us in this room are a lot more cognizant of the data that we get from our mobile devices, even our fridges that can be connected now. Who owns that data? Who has access to that data? Automation is a very shiny, exciting thing that we talk about. It is actually a future problem. It's the one thing I would love everyone here to take away. Automation always gets the headlines. We've had certain American electric car companies promising it every year for the last 10 years. Automation will come here in parts and in pieces, but it's a future problem. The problem with automation today is actually around that data side of things. And the data challenge, if you like, really comes in two halves. The first half is when something goes wrong, The right people need access to data on board and potentially off board that vehicle to determine what went wrong, why it went wrong, and also who's liable. I'm thinking from the insurance world, you can probably tell. That is the absolute core focus for us at Thatcham, making sure that we have access to that data, our members have access to that data in the event that something goes wrong. The other half of the automation data problem is the in-use monitoring. So once this lovely automated vehicle gets approved and authorised, how can we make sure that it's upholding those safety standards continually? What about when we update the safety standards? Because what we would hope, I'm sure all of us in this room, that these self-driving vehicles continually get better rather than just flatline. So collision data and in-use monitoring, we need to get access to the data on board these vehicles. Like I said before, data is quite a scary word for any developers, but we're not talking about all the data, we're talking about specific bits of data so that we can make informed decisions and also challenge particular vehicle manufacturers or authorised self-driving entities to improve and actually understand what's going on. So without that data, deployment of automated vehicles just won't happen. And you can see my point there is about trust. We always talk about data. Everyone earlier today has talked about how data can lead us to informed decisions. As a normal person, the data doesn't mean anything. Smart motorways, fantastic example. If people who actually use these systems, if they don't feel safe, they're not going to trust it. They're not going to use it. All those potential safety benefits just won't be realised. So we've kind of got a double battle here. We need the data to make evidence to do informed decision making, but we also need to consider how members of the public, normal people, our friends and families, how are they going to ingest that information? How can we make them feel safe? And that is really the biggest challenge with automation. But as I said, automation is a future problem. I'm talking multiple years away. Waymo, very exciting company. They're not coming to the UK anytime soon. It costs an awful lot of money to deploy Waymo robotaxis. Would anyone like to guess how much money Waymo made last year? They do about 50,000 driverless robotaxi trips in the States every month. They didn't make any money. They lost about £900 million. So when you see a headline that basically Google give them an extra $5 billion to continue their deployments in the States, you might think, oh, wow, they must be doing great. Well, actually, there might only be a few more years of deployment. So again, please don't believe the hype of automation. It will come eventually, but we've got much bigger problems to worry about first. If you want to learn a little bit more around automated vehicles and the insurer requirements, we work very closely with the ABI. We have this document that I can share with you, and we basically set out our requirements for what safe automated driving looks like from an insurance perspective. It's only 14 pages, it's about 2,000 words, it's not War and Peace, so it is quite succinct. But really what we talk about is access to data being central to everything. So the second risk, I just told you around automated vehicles kind of being a future problem. So what's the problem right now, you might be thinking? This. Can I have a show of hands if you've heard of Ford's Blue Cruise system? Okay, that's pretty good. That's about 60%. Okay, so if I told you right now in the UK, I can take my hands off the wheel on the motorway for 18 hours, if I went around the loop on the M25, would you believe me? The answer is yes. So that vehicle on the left is the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and it has a system called Blue Cruise. So I'm very fortunate, that's actually my car there, with a little registration plate covered up. And that allows me, on specific roads, i.e. motorways, to press the button. I can take my hands off the wheel. The car will maintain speed for me, keep me in the centre of the lane. That is a big question mark. Well, when it came out 2 years ago, big question mark. What does that mean? Why would people do this? So we spent a lot of time researching it, and I'll get onto that. But this technology is coming thick and fast. There is a UN regulation 171 coming through, very imminent. The BMW there is not there by accident. We know they've got a system. We know other vehicle manufacturers are also working on these systems as well. So why is this a problem? Well, not only taking your hands off the wheel maybe raises some questions over the safety implications, but also again, going back to that feeling safe, how do I explain to my dad, I'm on the motorway, my hands are off the wheel, I'm not touching the pedals, I'm not controlling the car, but actually I'm fully responsible and liable for the safe operation of that vehicle. If something goes wrong, I'm on the hook. And this is my point of level 2.99. So we don't really talk about SAE levels here in the UK anymore. We talk about automated or not. But level 3 automation is where essentially you transfer responsibility of safe driving to the vehicle. We're not quite going to get there. Why? Because vehicle manufacturers don't want to accept that liability. So what are they going to do? They're going to skirt up to that line as close as they can, i.e. keep on assisting you, more and more assistance, not quite going over that line to level 3. They're going to push all the way up to level 2.99. So I can take my hands off the wheel, but I'm fully responsible. We already know they're working on things like lane change. We already know they're working on things like navigating junctions and roundabouts, all with my hands off the wheel, all under the guise of assisted driving. Why? What are the safety benefits? These are the questions we need to start asking because we know the technology is being driven in that direction. My last point there at the bottom is about uncertain benefits. So I mentioned we've done some research on this. So that Mackie that we had, we gave it to various members of staff, and we drove around, well, about 4,500 kilometres. Range of Thatcham staff, just for ease. Some ADAS experts, some complete novices, never even used normal cruise control, let alone Blue Cruise. And on the right there, you can basically see a histogram of where they're looking. So we're able to basically tap into the driver monitoring system and look at where they're looking. So I imagine most of you who probably haven't heard of Blue Cruise would think, right, as soon as you can take your hands off the wheel, what do drivers do? They grab their mobile phone, they start texting. Actually, you can't do that because the car beeps at you. It can tell where you're looking. So if you look away from the road for about 5 seconds, it will bing and warn you and put your eyes back on the road. We actually saw that in the data. So at the top there is a histogram. So we've got the basic time on the bottom and the probability distribution of when they're driving. And you can see that with their manual driving, the hands-on mode and the hands-off mode, they're all very, very similar. And in fact, actually, when drivers were using Blue Cruise, i.e. when they had their hands off the road, they were actually looking at the road more than when they were driving manually. Which, again, I think most people probably wouldn't think about. But why is that? pretty simply, we think it's because the driver monitoring system beeps at you. So again, this small bit of technology that lets you, well, small, exciting bit of technology that lets you take your hands off the wheel actually isn't the headline. The driver monitoring is the headline. So it's about encouraging safer driving. Now, lots of caveats around this, quite small mileage. Again, all Thatcham drivers, we were in the car with them, so maybe they were slightly more compliant. But as a snapshot, we need to get more data about what these systems use. But potentially, using Blue Cruise on a motorway could be seen as safer than driving manually. Why? Because we're doing that nudge behavior of encouraging drivers to look at the road more. So we need to investigate this more. But I mentioned lane changing. So the BMW, for example, in Germany, you can initiate that car doing a lane change with your hands off the wheel by looking in the door mirror. They're already talking about system-initiated lane changes, i.e. the car decides to do a lane change for you. Again, all under the guise of assisted driving. Safety benefits of that, people feeling safe. What about liability? What if there's an accident when the car is doing that maneuver, decided by the car, but I'm still on the hook? Again, all these questions come out with this kind of technology. And my big concern is more about this pushing that line of level 2.9 assisted driving rather than moving over into automation. This is coming probably later this summer. That Mackie was only approved in the UK by exemption, an Article 39 exemption, if anyone knows what that is. So again, not actually regulated yet here in the UK. So it's something we really need to watch out for. And the final risk is actually ADAS robustness. So we've had a lot of talk today around the benefits of ADAS and how much we've actually done to drive fitment of ADAS systems on vehicles across the board. We've generally focused on passenger cars here at Thatcham. We've done a phenomenal job. Euro NCAP have done a phenomenal job. But people are still having accidents, unfortunately. Why is that? That's got to be the big question. We've done this really good push of having all this technology fitted as standard. Cameras, radars, ultrasonics, even driver monitoring now. But again, people are still having collisions. Why is that? So we did a little piece of work here. So we took the standard Euro NCAP test, which is the GVT, is the general vehicle target. It's a nice foam car that you saw in some videos earlier. And we picked a lower segment car, and we did some test runs driving at the back. That column on the left there was actually just meant to be that test case. We actually got really, really erratic responses from that car, which we thought was going to be the test case. So we paused for the morning, went back after lunch, and then the car did really, really well. Oh, okay, interesting. Same weather conditions, same temperatures, same everything. And then we tweaked it by moving that target by about 20 degrees. So when you approach a roundabout, it's actually about a 20-degree junction. So that was why we moved the target just by 20 degrees. The theory being that perhaps just by tweaking that Euro NCAP standardized test, we might get some different results. And sure enough, we did. Now, I'm not saying that the Euro NCAP testing isn't appropriate, because you have to test in a standardized way. It's a scientific method, right? We have to be able to compare apples to apples. But what we are showing here is that by moving slightly outside of that Euro NCAP sphere, results become quite erratic. And this is because we need to try and find different ways now to test these systems. Like I said, we've done a great job of getting all this tech fitted as standard, but we're still having front-to-rear collisions with cars that have this technology fitted. So we need to start trying to find out different ways to test. You can't quite do A/B testing in a live road, because that's not going to end up very well for anyone. But we need more external noise factors to really understand how robust these technologies are. Things like LiDAR have always been promised to be the kind of the savior in the next generation of ADAS. But actually, without really building in this robustness layer of ADAS, we're never going to know whether or not the systems actually perform as they should. And that leads back to my original point around data access. The system on board these cars are getting more and more complicated, and unfortunately that means they're getting more and more closed off. We're having to rely more on the vehicle manufacturer playing ball and sharing information, providing dossiers, which again certainly has its place. But in the real world, cars are still having accidents, and we need to find out more. And so we need better collaboration, particularly with the vehicle manufacturers and the technology developers. But we, as a kind of a safety industry and a safety body, really, need to start demanding that data in a positive sense. It's not about interrogation and calling people out. It's about building that safe system. And again, typically people work in isolation, and we need to kind of break that down. And I really hope that we can kind of drive this culture of sharing that data slightly more, so we can actually get to those conclusions and actually get the roads to be safer for everyone. Thank you very much.
Do you want to take a seat and invite the other speakers up to join me? 5 very powerful presentations there. Very, very interesting. Now, would anyone like to kick off with a question to one or more of our great panelists? I have a question from the audience. Please wait for the microphone so that colleagues on the Teams call with a question here in the second row.
Says on. Well, yes. There we go. Yeah. Hi there, Richard Owen from Agilicis. I love future gazing, but I really want to know more about what level of technology fitment we currently have on the network. Is there a gap in the knowledge that we have about that level of technology fitment within cars, within vans, lorries, and also within motorbikes? Because I suspect that it's not very high on motorbikes. I haven't seen a motorbike fitted with ISA. I'm not sure whether any motorcyclist would buy one either, but I might be wrong. So I'm just really interested in what we know at the moment.
Richard, you invite your first stab at that.
Does the microphone work? Fantastic. We know more than you think.
we know minimum spec. The General Safety 2 did a really good job in bringing every sort of vehicle up to a standard. The interesting thing about this is the nuanced question, answer to this question, I'm sorry. So when you say level of equipment, you then say, well, how many vehicles have intelligent speed assistance? Well, which sort? The sort that meets the regulation that is applied as of last year, or the sort that was around in 2018 that developed. So we know quite a lot about what's there. What we don't know so much about, and Matthew may talk more about the NCAP data, is the performance level of the system on the vehicle.
Yeah, so this is working. If you're talking about equipment on vehicle, Euro NCAP began testing and incentivizing ADAS equipment, specifically AEB, back in 2014. So we've got 10 years worth of cars with AEB. And you'll find it very, very difficult to buy a new car now with no AEB systems. In fact, most cars have got AEB and lane support, etc., etc. We know some of those systems are working very effectively. We've done studies looking at AEB performance, and it's reducing crashes by something like 40%. But we know some technologies like lane support systems are not as effective. We don't know why, probably because drivers turn it off, but also it's the nature of the collisions that you have. There's less time to react. So some of the technology we know works, some of the other technology, it's a little bit of a black box, but we don't see why it could be counterproductive. And one of the issues that we see now, and Tom raised it, was the fact of the performance, the robustness, and also driver acceptance. So one of the key issues we've got is that we know that most drivers are quite happy with AEB systems. Although they reckon they might get some false positives, most of the time they don't see any response. What they do see every single drive is the car beeping at them because they've gone over a white line, or beeping at them because they've broken the speed limit. And drivers don't like those things, and they habitually turn them off. If you see any YouTube review of a vehicle now, a new vehicle, they praise the vehicle because it has one button to turn all that stuff off. That is a great benefit. Any YouTuber says this, and this is a big problem that we've got, and it's the way technology has been introduced. What we're doing about it is trying to make these systems more intelligent, so they're based on a threat level. So why warn the driver they're going over a white line if there's no threat for them to go over that white line? However, if there's a truck coming the other way, they need to know, or maybe don't even warn them, just put them back on the right side of the road, similar to the technology I think my colleague from Honda was talking about. So I think the technology will mature more, and in time people will accept it a lot more.
Further questions? I have some of my own for sure. I'm going to start with Patrick, if that's okay. And apologies, it's a tough one. One of the worries I have about the safe system is something you alluded to, is that there's always the danger, well, if they do their bit, then our bit will work. Is that something, is that acceptable? Can we allow for that? It feels like the safe system has to accommodate shortcomings in other areas. That's the sort of Swiss cheese model, isn't it? That you're allowing for situations where the road markings aren't perfect, for example. So yeah, how will Honda kind of accommodate users that aren't always compliant, or infrastructure that isn't always perfect?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, and I'll touch on that, but I might come back on a couple of your points as well. So I think the safe system is what we can develop within Honda ourselves. This is what we can control. So control what you can control, manage what you can't. And then the second piece about that holistic bit about the infrastructure, the roads, other users, that's almost to affect my job, going out and having those conversations with stakeholders. So we don't want to simply be cooking things up within Honda in isolation. We want to be out there having those conversations, engaging with stakeholders, engaging with policymakers, and making them aware on simple things if you want these systems to work. So I know the UK government is very keen for the UK to be a test bed, a leading country in terms of advanced driver assist and automation and so on. And the conversations we're having with officials at DFT are, well, that's great, but let's make sure that the lines are painted on the roads, we've got all the right infrastructure in place. You've made a decision, government, about what technologies you want to use and put in place, and having those conversations with, whether it's within our trade bodies such as EU CAR or at UN level to play our role. So there is that technology development role, but equally there's an advocacy and engagement and communications role that we're taking place both here in the UK, in Brussels, in Geneva, and elsewhere in the world. And just to come back on the point on applying these technology systems to motorcycles, I think you make a great point. There's a balance there. One is about the cost-benefit analysis. So installing some of these more high-tech equipment on a motorcycle is meant to be an accessible and affordable mode of transport. If you're adding hundreds of pounds, thousands of pounds worth of equipment, that calculation goes slightly the wrong way. Also, there's the rider acceptance piece. Are riders willing to accept some of these technologies? But equally, things like, could you have a technology that's moving the bike as in a car that the rider's not quite comfortable with? So I think there's a bigger conversation to be had around technology in bikes, and that's why we say, for at least on the bike side, it's about rider behavior, making sure that they understand how to ride safely and ride within the rules. So very much a two-track approach there.
Mabin, are there any questions online?
There's one from Jamie over there, and I'll grab the...
Yeah, thank you. Jamie, go ahead.
Hi, I've got two questions because I'm greedy. The first one is obviously about seatbelts. Is why haven't we got a system that says, hang on, the seatbelt's not in, I'm not moving? Because we know drivers either put it behind them or they buy something to plug in. So, we've got some very clever engineers. Can someone come up with a system? And the other one is, when I don't turn off the stuff on my car, I want my insurance company to know so that they can lower my risk and sort of give me a better rate. So how do we link these things up? So actually, the insurance company knows actually it's being used, because otherwise they're saying, well, we've either got to discount it for everyone, or do we say, well, we think 40% of people are using it. So how do we link these things up better?
Tom, do you want to...
Yeah, if only I'd talked about sharing of data earlier. That's the core of it. So to your first point, Jamie, around kind of immobilising the vehicle, that's always been very challenging for us. Again, we're here to talk about safety, not security, but even immobilising a vehicle once it's been stolen, completely immobilising it is quite challenging for various reasons. But yes, again, it will be false positives. So the one time that your car doesn't start because it doesn't think you've got your seatbelt on, that's a headline. That's brand reputation lost. So that's the main reason why we don't have that. When it comes to the sharing of data, again, it's the mechanisms by sharing that data we don't really have, the standards by which we share that data, personal information and the challenges around GDPR. So this is why the data conversation, we need to start having at a serious level. Because it's not just about, right, we want this data to do this. How do we do it is the real problem. Everyone agrees that sharing of data is a good idea, but not many people are actually doing it. And that's kind of the real challenge we need to start to crack.
Just to come back on that technology piece, I don't want to touch the insurance piece. I've moved away from that. But the technology piece, well, firstly, there are many instances where you want to be in the vehicle, manoeuvring the vehicle, where you don't need a seatbelt, and it wouldn't be of benefit to you if you're manoeuvring the vehicle. So that is at least the rationale for it. However, there is technology to make sure you do wear the seatbelt and you don't just sit on the seat, even if you've latched it to turn the seatbelt reminder off or put something into the tongue to stop it activating. And that's driver monitoring systems. And that, for us, is one of the next great big advances in vehicle technology. Driver monitoring systems, because they can see whether you've actually got the belt on and it's correctly fitted, and to warn you. So if you just latch the belt, you can sit on it like taxi drivers do. However, you won't get past the driver monitoring system. And the great thing about driver monitoring is new technology that's up and coming is actually looking at cognitive behavior. So that driver monitoring system can not only see whether you've got your eyes open, you're looking left or looking right, which is what Tom was talking about, but it can actually begin to see whether you're paying attention, your actual cognitive state. You know, you see many crash situations where the driver was looking but didn't see, you know, didn't cognitively understand it. The driver monitoring systems can do that, and they're a great enabler because, as I was saying, they can then change the way the ADAS systems work. They've got to be able to understand what you're doing, but that is the next big leap and can, you know, stop you doing that with your seatbelt.
It's the time for me. If any of you are interested in history, check out the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 1971 seatbelt interlock. It's the only bit of federal motor vehicle safety regulation that's been withdrawn. Lasted 6 months. A massive counterproductive, delayed seatbelt regulation in the US for probably 20 or 30 years. The stuff on the technology is fascinating, and remember, in the general safety regulation, and therefore in most vehicles now sold in the UK, there's a thing called an event data recorder. And that means if any of you guys are involved in a collision when somebody's seriously enough hurt or worse that the police are investigating, or one of our research teams are investigating, we will download the data from that vehicle. If it's a Mackie and it's complying with a 171 type of regulation, we'll know a lot about the driver monitoring as well, but we'll know what speed you're doing, we'll know which systems you turned off, and the police could ask you those questions.
Time for one more question. Yes, please.
Good morning. I'm here to represent the Institute of Traffic Accident Investigators, and I've spent nearly 20 years in the industry as a police collision investigator, and in the last 10 years on a consultancy basis. And the question is more about buses, just to give Alix a heads up, because it's probably coming her way. Maybe 15 years ago, sorry, maybe 10 years ago or so, there was I guess a relatively crude driver monitoring system called Rebus, I think it was called, and there was a traffic light system in the cab, and it monitored driver acceleration, braking, and excessive idling. And if you accelerated gently, braked gently, and didn't leave the engine idling too long, the green light stayed on, and as you sort of moved up the scale of the inverse, so to speak, you ended up with a red light. I dealt with a collision probably around that time where a driver, a young girl, stepped out in front of a bus and the driver basically hit and killed her, sadly. And when you looked at the CCTV, the bus driver didn't brake particularly hard. And soon after that, I found myself in a canteen at a bus station where around the wall of the canteen, it was effectively a wall of shame of everyone's readouts from this system. And you had one end, you had the green of all the good drivers going through amber to red at the other end of the canteen wall. So drivers were encouraged not to accelerate too hard, not to brake too hard, etc., etc. And it fascinates me, all this technology fascinates me, but more so how drivers interact with it by virtue of what I do. And having worked in London and being based in South London, we often get collisions with London buses, and we see this trend of drivers not braking as hard as they could because they have duties of care to their passengers on board. And a crash very recently brought it to the fore where a pedestrian steps out. Not only did they have the time and space to stop, they hit the pedestrian. And not only did they hit the pedestrian, they then physically drove over them with both axles. And when you watch the video, you're screaming at the monitor, just brake, and the driver didn't. And I was just wondering, really, the question was, these systems, because I noted we're comfortable with car drivers braking hard, and okay, they could brake harder, they could brake quicker, and hence AEB. And when there was a slide up saying AEB or associating AEB with buses, I was just wondering how you find drivers perform, and how that AEB is going to factor in with the duty of care of the driver to the passengers on board as well.
It's a great question. Alix, ethical dimension of AEB?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So the bus driving task is, very, very complex because they have a range of passengers who are often seated, but they're often unbelted and standing. So those vehicles are completely different to the vast majority of others. And truly admire bus drivers because it is a very complex task they're dealing with. One of the streams of work we have done for Transport for London is looking at implementing AEB on their fleet, and that has now gone live. They have vehicles driving around with AEB fitted as of this year. We did a lot of research into, you know, the capabilities of the systems and that balance of protecting the road users are outside of the bus against the potential to injure people on board the bus. The particularly difficult point is if there's a false activation of AEB. If AEB is, you know, if the driver is braking anyway, then, you know, AEB is not doing anything different. But if AEB operates and it didn't need to, that's the challenging circumstance that you might injure somebody on board the bus. So that was the big concern from Transport for London. We did a huge programme of work on that. There's several publications I'd love to share with you, and we can talk after this. But yeah, TfL, as I say, they have buses driving around now with AEB. It's currently in shadow mode in general, so it's not actually intervening, but the system is recording what it would have done all of those times, so that, again, we can build that evidence base so that when they do turn it on, they're much more confident about the level of performance on the road. So yeah, let's talk in a minute.
That was fantastic panel session. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We're slightly over. We're going to have a full 15 minutes for coffee break. So if we can back in here at 10:02 for a prompt start, and we'll carry on with the Safe Roads and Safe Speeds session. But in the meantime, please thank the panelists for their great contribution.